I'm Eloy Ortiz Oakley, President and CEO of College Futures Foundation, and you're invited to Opportunity Forum with College Futures. Hi, I'm Eloy Ortiz Oakley, President and CEO of the College Futures Foundation. And I'm here today with Dr. Jolene Koester, the interim chancellor of the California State University. Jolene has been in this role for just over a year now, but she has also been in and around the CSU for quite some time, so she knows the CSU very well. Dr. Koester, thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule and for joining us here on Opportunity Forum with College Futures.
Pleased to be with you.
Great. Now, I will take a quick point of privilege to just say thank you as a colleague. When I had the opportunity to serve as chancellor of the California Community Colleges, it was a pleasure to work with you, pleasure to learn from you and to hear about your history with the CSU. So thank you for your service.
Thank you. Pleased to be doing this.
So tell us a little bit about your journey and how did this journey start for you at the CSU?
I started in the CSU at Cal State Sacramento, as it was then officially and unofficially known, in 1983 as an assistant professor in communication studies. And let me just say, most salient about that employment and that work is that I came to the CSU without any awareness of its unique mission and its unique role in educating California's students, completely oblivious to that mission, but found pretty quickly a place that resonated with me, partially because of my own background and partially because I understood its societal impact. So I spent 17 years there as a faculty member, an administrator, 7 years as the chief academic officer before moving on to Cal State Northridge as its president.
Given your experience in the CSU, given your time leading Northridge, as you jumped into this role as the interim chancellor, and I know it was a tough situation that you were walking into for many, many reasons. From your viewpoint, what are some of the challenges as well as the opportunities that are facing the Cal State system?
Our challenge is that for the state of California, the California State University system's health and consequence is of the utmost importance, because for the CSU, our world is California. Our students graduate and stay in California to work, and our universities are focused on serving regional California needs for the most part, even our universities that have more of a statewide mission. So I see the CSU's health and well-being as integrally linked to the health and well-being of this now fourth economy in the world that the state of California represents. I would also say, Eloy, and I think you and I both understand this, California's population is one of many inequities, many races, ethnicities, cultural points of view, ways of living and being. And so California's ability to integrate and pull all of these populations into service in a democratic way is absolutely essential for the future just of California, but also of the nation. And I think the CSU's role is instrumental, essential, critical to achieving that kind of a world.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm really glad that you brought up the importance of and the key of the mission of the CSU to be that backbone of California, to provide the access regionally and statewide. Now, speaking of the mission, I know that amongst some of the challenges has been this post-pandemic environment, the challenges we see facing students. I know in my own experience in community colleges, I saw the enrollment decline transpire before my eyes, the challenges that learners were having across the state. So how are you and your team at the CSU looking at and tackling some of the enrollment challenges that you see coming?
We have been looking at and moving forward in a variety of ways with respect to this. First, when I began as interim chancellor, it was clear that the CSU faced a number of strategic issues. And one of those was in the enrollment area. So we began at a more conceptual, analytical planning level to look at the ways in which we needed to adjust how the system as a whole tackled and led with respect to our enrollment. So there was work underway before the beginning of the 22-23 academic year. And then we accelerated that work because the signs of that enrollment challenge manifest really starkly as we looked at the enrollment for 22-23. So there's a couple of things that we have underway. First, we will be moving to a different kind of role for the system office with respect to enrollment. In the past, we've had a facilitative tool basis, kind of easing the enrollment issues on the various university campuses. And we're now at a point where we have to be much more actively engaged with respect to that. And that includes things like shifting some of the resources that have been allocated to some of our universities that have had persistent and present enrollment challenges, shifting those resources to other parts of the state where there is more of a headcount demand so that we're able to accurately and adequately fund those. But as well, in many ways, the work that we have to do with respect to enrollment dovetails very, very nicely with the efforts around that we have subsumed under the label of GI 2025, where we have worked to improve both retention and graduation. Because part of what we saw, Eloy, with the drop in enrollment this year was a reduction in the average unit load for students. And when you're a system as large as we are, even a small reduction in the number of units, credit units that students were taking, translated into a really significant overall system level impact. So those efforts on the university campuses to assure that students get the classes they need and want, and then the support efforts that our university folks are already engaged in to retain those students becomes really important. One really interesting statistic is that we are, with new freshmen, back at a pre-pandemic level.
That's great.
And in addition, a lot of the efforts that the presidents and their teams took during the beginning in the fall of 22 reduced the gap that we thought we would have in our enrollment this year. So full speed ahead, greater engagement by the chancellor's office staff, doubling up, tripling up on our efforts to improve retention and graduation. All of those are critical.
That's great. Let me ask you one additional question to that. There's a huge demand to get access to post-secondary education for working adults, those individuals who may have stopped out from the CSU and began working, or never quite found a post-secondary experience that worked for them, and now they find themselves, in their 30s or in their 40s, needing some sort of post-secondary credential. How does the CSU think about those learners?
Yeah, we absolutely think there's a role to play, and it is one of a sense of responsibility, that we have a responsibility to provide that education to those individuals as well. During the pandemic, the focus could not be on planning ahead and planning for new populations or populations that deserved additional attention. The university leadership, both administrators and faculty, are now beginning to understand that the need to develop that capacity. At our Board of Trustees meeting last week, there was a presentation by two of the presidents who are involved in a commission for professional and continuing education, PACE, we call it. Have to have an acronym, right? And part of their effort will be to speed up what it is we can offer. The challenge will be organizing this work in a way that reflects synergy between and among the 23 universities, rather than having a lot of independent aspects of the universities going off in directions that might even be competitive with each other. So it's a serious issue. It's an untapped resource, I think, of the CSU, and it does fall directly into how the CSU sees its mission and responsibility.
So given the CSU's mission of providing access to Californians of all sorts of diverse backgrounds in regions up and down the state, one of the issues that's been confounding students across the country is the total cost of attending college. And certainly that's the case for many learners here in California, given the high cost of living. How is the CSU thinking about addressing the total cost of attendance for students that it serves?
It's a good question. I mean, that you have made one of the most important points in your introduction to me of the question, which is that it's the high cost of living that affects most dramatically the total cost of attendance, because the CSU's tuition is frankly just among the lowest of the low across the nation. So there's pressures on that tuition front. But in the 10 years that I was not a formal employee of the CSU, when I was doing consulting work, CSU stepped up efforts in student basic needs around housing, food, and clothing and transportation in pretty remarkable ways. And if you go and visit our universities, any of our universities, you will see that we have provided a great deal of support for our students who might be on the margins of stability because of their current economic circumstances. Now, there's variations that I think are lost in the way in which we talk about this, and that is that in different parts of the state there are different cost of living.
Right.
And so what works or is necessary in one of our universities may not be what is necessary or needed in another. So it's a very complex matrix in terms of understanding what is needed. And I think the language itself sometimes obfuscates those variations.
So let's jump to another demographic of students, a demographic of students that's near and dear to my heart, and that is transfer students. And of course, the CSU is the greatest transfer partner for the California community colleges, has always been, will always be. I know we talk a lot about the University of California, but by and large, the majority of students seek their transfer home at a CSU campus. There's been a lot of work done over the years to improve transfer, to streamline transfer. I had the privilege of being at the signing ceremony of SB 1440 with then Chancellor Jack Scott, then Governor Schwarzenegger. So we've come a long way, but there still seems to be work to be done given the demand to transfer to a CSU campus. And tell me how the CSU thinks about transfer student access. And how does it continue to develop that partnership with the California community colleges?
Well, first of all, I would say that the CSU, from its inception, was built on a shared partnership, a synergistic relationship with the community colleges. I actually remember the signing with Jack Scott. Eloy, you and I have been around a long time.
I also remember this chancellor by the name of Charlie Reed, who was hanging out there
Yes.
as well.
Yes, I remember Charlie fondly as well. He was my boss, so, and a great boss, I would say. So I would say that for the CSU, it's a basic premise, it's a basic principle. And I think at every step of the way, when advocacy groups from both within and external to public higher education point out ways in which we can and should improve, the CSU has stepped up to do good work to improve that. I'm very impressed in the chancellor's office with the staff that we have working to not just respond to legislation, but to respond to real life issues that they learn as they go about working across the 23 universities. The dual admission approach, the transfer pact essentially is what it is to make sure that works. And I think the record we have is one that I would celebrate, of constant change to improve that transfer process, always with a recognition that there's more that can be done. And that's part of what you and others do, right? You help us see, you put up a mirror to us and you say, well, here in this area, it isn't working. So what are you going to do? But I would just proclaim a real faith and belief that the CSU responds to try to address what those obstacles are.
Well, I certainly agree with that. I think there's been so much work done, and I certainly tip my hat to the academic senates of both systems. They've done a lot of work. It's very difficult work to bring all of the campuses and senates and all the constituent groups along. So I appreciate the leadership of both systems. And I certainly look forward to seeing how this new dual admission program works out, because I think it's absolutely the right direction. So let's switch gears a little bit to another challenge that many of our students, learners in post-secondary education across the country have been facing. Our organization sponsored a report recently called Degrees of Distress. It looks at how higher education institutions, particularly through policies or practices, impact student mental health. So how does the CSU think about, particularly holistically think about supports for students that attend to their mental health?
Well, clearly we start from the position that we need to pay attention, right? That it's a priority. So when you start from that position, then you take action appropriate to what it is you know about the students that you have. And I would say one of the, again, defining characteristics of this landscape for the CSU is that we have 23 universities. And so it's best to do this kind of work and planning at the individual university level, because the unique circumstances of each of those universities really shapes, constrains both opportunities and obstacles on the pathway to service. What the features are at Humboldt Polytechnic are different than the features of the universities at Cal State San Marcos or San Diego State, just to do the geographic juxtaposition of the institutions. So the university has strong commitments, the university system has strong commitments, There are struggles across the system in terms of trying to respond appropriately with appropriate levels of staffing that are different from place to place. There are different models that are being considered and implemented in various of the universities. So it's the basic answer is it's important to us. The next part of that answer is that presidents and their leadership teams strive to enact that commitment in slightly different ways, depending on their circumstances. It's a societal issue, not just a higher ed issue, I think. Hard to sometimes differentiate between what's in the university and the university's responsibility and what's societal responsibility.
One of the other things that our organization is really cared about and cares about going forward is the importance of diversifying the leadership on our college and university campuses. We feel it's critical to student success. We feel it's critical for learners to see themselves represented in leadership roles, represented in the classroom as well. And there are several important leadership openings at the CSU, including the search for a new chancellor, including the search for several campus presidents. What do you think can be done to continue to help improve how diverse public university systems recruit and hire leaders of color? And by the way, I need to congratulate you on the magnificent hire for Sac State. I think Luke Wood is going to do a fabulous job. So you've already begun that work. Obviously, you answered my question before I even got to it by hiring a diverse leader at Sac State. But how can public universities like the CSU continue to improve the diversity of the leadership?
Well, first, let me say we've hired other diverse leaders for other CSU campuses as well. San Jose State, Monterey Bay, the interim at Fullerton. We have other diverse leaders already serving in established presidencies at a number of the CSUs. We actually also made a regular appointment of Mike Lee at Sonoma State. So I'm proud of our overall record. Let me say, when the foundation's publication focusing on hiring came out, one of our presidents sent it to me, I think in advance of the formal publication last summer. And I quickly went to the recommendations because that's the heart of it, correct? What is it that we're going to do? If we accept the value, which I unequivocally accept the value of assuring that leadership reflects those that we serve and that our students can see in leaders themselves. If you accept that, then what is it that we need to do? And I'm pleased, although I don't want to sound too celebratory about it, but we essentially are doing all of your recommendations. We've hired search firms who have individuals that represent diversity that are working with us. We, in every way that a chancellor can, assures diversity on the search advisory committees. And you know, if you wanted to take the time, you could go back and examine the search advisory committees that we have used to find the proof of my description. We have training in implicit bias that we provide to the search committees multiple times in multiple ways. We ask questions in ways that allow individuals to display their thinking, their good experiences, and that do not necessarily privilege unique or more elite kinds of experiences. We get to see these individuals as they would be. And then we have made excellent hires with high quality individuals who have incredible backgrounds and who also add now to the diversity of leadership in the CSU. And on a personal note, I would say that for someone like me, who's much older than you or a lot of other people who are in these leadership positions, I didn't have any female models of leadership.
Right.
There were none
Right.
as I began this journey. I mean, when I got to Sacramento State, there were women who were department chairs, and there'd been a woman who had been the provost and chief academic officer. But that was the first time in my professional life or personal life that I had had a leader in that kind of a position. So I understand this at a very personal level, and I'm really committed, and the system is committed to doing this.
I know on behalf of the entire College Futures team, we really appreciate the leadership that you and your colleagues at CSU have taken on this issue. Thank you for taking the time, Jolene, and most importantly, thank you for taking on this role. I mean, you didn't have to take on this role. You chose to take on this role, and it clearly speaks to your commitment to higher education and your love for the CSU. So thank you for being our guest today.
I'm very pleased to have been here. The CSU is California's primary mover of social mobility. All 23 of our universities rank in the top rankings in terms of any of the social mobility indices out there. It's because of that that I'm doing this work as an interim chancellor.
Well, thank you. And it was a pleasure to talk with you.
Pleasure to talk with you as well.
I want to thank Dr. Koester once again for joining me on this episode of Opportunity Forum with College Futures, a conversation space with innovators and influencers in and around higher education, working to help students move onward and upward. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and we'll see you next time.